Hi, in this video we're going to talk about program planning. That's involved in trying to figure out how do you start? You're sitting here looking at a blank screen. How do you know what to type first? So I'm assuming that we know a couple of things. We know how to display text, we know how to ask the user for input, either text or a number, and we know how to use if statements to compare results. We can see are two numbers the same? Is one piece of text the same as another? So let's make a program that's going to be a simple addition quiz. So here's an example of what the output might look like. I want it to say, hey, I'm going to quiz you on some simple addition. We'll ask a couple of problems, and then we'll have the user type their response. And then depending on whether or not they got the problem right, we'll either tell them that they were right by saying correct, or we'll tell them wrong and what the real answer was. And then, as they're going, we'll keep track of how many problems they got correct. So when you're staring at the blank sheet of paper here, don't start trying to think what Java do I type? Instead, you want to make a plan. So programmers usually call this pseudocode. The idea is you want to capture the logic of what you want to do. You want to capture what sequence of steps do you want the program to do for you, but write it down in English instead of Java. So if I'm looking at this output here, I think the first thing I want to do is display the welcome message. So I want to display this message about, hey, I'm going to quiz you. Okay, then what I want to do is I want to ask, what's 3 plus 7? So that will probably be some kind of display statement, maybe a print line statement, or maybe inside my J option pane. And then I'm going to get user input. Well, then we'll say get user input. And I know, or I remember from before, if I'm getting user input, and they're typing a number, I might need to convert the text into a number. So I'm thinking get user input, and I'm going to save it into user answer. And then convert user answer into an int. And then once I have their answer, I'll say if their number equals, and let's see, what's the answer here? 3 plus 7 is 10. So if their number equals 10, then I'll display correct. Otherwise, so else, I'll display nope, the correct answer is 10. Okay, so this is sort of a plan, and you see it's kind of a mix of English and Java. And again, the idea is I want to kind of think out what sequence of things do I want the computer to do, but you don't have to remember the exact commands in Java. I don't, user, J option pane, I don't quite remember, but it doesn't matter because you're just trying to make a plan for yourself. So now that we've got this kind of rough plan, let's try and translate each line into Java. So display a welcome message. I'm going to use system.out.println for that. So, hey, I'm going to quiz you. And you could write a longer message if you wanted. So then I'm going to ask, what's 3 plus 7? I tend to like to use J option pane for this, so let's do that. String response equals J option pane.show input dialog, and then I'll say, what's 3 plus 7? Okay, you might be thinking, but wait a minute. How do you remember what to type here? Well, that's where you need to be able to look back up in a previous program you've written or in a handout or a reference. So when you're program planning, just think, okay, I want to ask the user to enter a number. But then when it comes time to type the Java, that's when you can look up how do you actually have Java do that for you. So J option pane, so I'm asking them to type an answer, and I'm saving that answer inside R. Then I need to convert whatever they typed in R into a number, and I need to save that number somewhere, so I'm creating an int, which I'll call user answer. And then I'll say integer.parseInt R. So these two lines are a common pattern that you're going to be using a lot. So I'm not saying memorize them, but you should be aware that it's a two-step process to get a number from a J option pane. First, you get the text that they type, then you take the text, convert it into an int, and save it into a new variable. All right, so I've got that far. So now let's see if they're correct. So in my pseudocode here, in my plan, I say if their number equals 10. All right, so now I have to ask, what variable is holding their number? Well, they originally typed something that gets saved into R, but I can't say if R equals 10, because if you look at the data type for R is a string. So I can't ask if the text that's whatever they typed is the same as the integer 10. But remember, you took that text and you converted it into an integer, user answer. So I want to know if user answer, which is what they actually typed, if that thing is equal to 10. And if it is, all system.out.println correct. Otherwise, all system.out.println sorry, the answer is 10. Okay, so far so good. Let's run it and see what it looks like so far. Hey, I'm going to quiz you. What's 3 plus 7? I'm going to say 8, and it said, sorry, the answer is 10. All right, so far so good. So now I got my first question, and if I want to ask a second question, you might copy and paste. You're thinking, okay, like, we'll start with the question, and we'll go through the end of the answer. So let's do that and see what happens. I'm going to add a comment here which says, question 2. Just to provide a visual separation for myself so I can kind of see where does question 1 start, where does question 2 start. Okay, so you see some red underlining here. It says duplicate local variable. So what that means is I already created the variable R up here, so I can't create it again right here. I've got two things I could do. I don't have to create it again, but I could just reuse it. So I deleted the string part, which is only required the first time you create a variable. And now instead I'm still asking a question, but I'm saving the answer into R, and that's just overwriting the old value of R. That's totally okay to do. A different thing you could do is you could create a different string variable, R2, and then use R2 in your second question. I tend to like to reuse my variables if I can, so I'm just going to reuse my original R variable here. All right, so my new question is 10 minus 9. And now, same problem. I'm recreating user answer that I've already created up here. So you got two choices. You could make user answer 2, and now it's okay. Or let's just reuse user answer by saving their new number that they typed into the old variable. So this is overwriting their previous answer. And now for my new question, I could check if the answer is equal to 1, which is the right answer to the math problem. And again, correct or sorry, the answer is 1. Okay, so now I'm up to 2 questions. Let's run it. So 3 plus 7 is, let's get it right this time, 10. Correct. 10 minus 9 is 100, and it says, sorry, the answer is 1. All right, well, so you could do this again for question 3, but there's a piece of the assignment that I've left out. Remember, I want at the end to be able to have a print statement that prints how many you got right. So like, you got, and then some number right. Okay, well, how am I going to know how many they got right? The only way the computer ever remembers anything is if you put something in a variable. So that means I'm going to need to create a variable whose job is to store the number of problems that they got correct. So at the very top, I'm going to create my variable. I'm going to call it numRight. And at the beginning, the number they got right is 0, because they haven't answered any questions yet. I'm thinking, okay, so what's the best data type here? Well, it's not a string, and I think the number that they get right is always a whole number, so I'm going to create it as an integer. All right. So now I got to find the places in the program where I know that they're getting an answer right. So for example, here where it's printing correct, I know that they got the first problem correct. So in here, I want to add 1 to numRight. Okay, so a common beginner's mistake would be to do this. You say numRight plus 1. And that kind of makes sense because you're saying, like, take numRight and add 1 to it. The problem is you need to actually save this number back inside of numRight. So the pattern for adding 1 to a variable is this. numRight equals numRight plus 1. And the way to think about this, remember an equals sign means take what's on the right and save it inside what's on the left. So if I cover up the left part with your hand, or if you cover up the left part with your hand, and just think about this highlighted part. Num right is however many I've gotten right so far. So actually in this case it's probably 0. I take that number and I add 1, and now I take that new number and I save it back inside the variable to update its value. Okay, so I've added 1 if they got this question right. I'm going to do the same thing down here in question 2. So if they get this one correct, I'll add another one. And now at the bottom, I can use that variable to display how many overall that they got right. So let's run it now. I'm going to get one of them right, so I'll answer this one wrong. Sorry, the answer is 10. This one I'll get answer right, correct, and it says you got 1 right. So that's the process. Let's review the steps. The first thing that you need to do is you have to decide what do you actually want to tell the computer to do. And that involves making a plan that's usually in a mixture of English and Java. Like, you don't need to remember all the details because it's hard to look at this. It's hard to kind of decipher what does all this mean. So instead, write kind of steps to yourself. Just like display the question, get the user answer, convert the answer into a number. And then if they got it right, do something, otherwise do something else. And that's going to be the template that you're going to use, and then you're going to ask for every single thing that you want it to do. Okay, in Java, how do I ask the user for an answer? How do I convert their text into a number? And that's where you need to look the answers up based on our handouts or based on other programs you've seen. Okay, come back for the next video because I'm going to show you how to make this kind of one step more interesting.